Today's event is held both in French and English with simultaneous translation. Just so you know, IPI is becoming increasingly bilingual these days, and we recently added a Francophone page to our website, compiling all of the IPI products available in the French language. So again, for French is channel 2, for English is channel 1. Today's policy forum is entitled Investing in Peace and Prevention in the Sahel-Sahara, and is part of a multi-year initiative in partnership with Switzerland and the United Nations, consisting in a series of regional conversations. These regional conversations bring together participants from North, West, and Central Africa. The participants come from varied horizons, political leaders, civil servants, members of various armed forces and security organizations, members of civil society, religious and traditional authorities, media representative, private sector representative, and men and women in all of them. They also include various researchers and delegates from regional and sub-regional organizations. So it's a pretty varied group of participants. Today we will hear from a select few who participated in the last edition of these regional conversations, which was held in N'Djamena, Chad, this past June. The N'Djamena conversations address the nature of violent extremism in the Sahel-Sahara regions as perceived by those affected by it. It examined questions relating to state-society relations, political participation, and inclusive dialogue as entry points for national policies at preventing violence at the national, community, and individual levels. Participants further examined approaches promoting a shift from simply addressing the factors that drive and sustain violence to strengthening those capacities associated with peaceful and resilient societies. They also formulated recommendations for action that could be implemented by practitioners from the region, both within states and through regional and sub-regional groupings, in some cases with the support from the UN and its partners, including support for existing or new mechanisms and processes at the local, national, regional levels. The conclusions from the N'Djamena conversations are captured in the meeting notes that were at the front of the door, both in English and French. They look like this. But before turning out to our distinguished panelists on my right and left, we will first hear opening remarks from His Excellency Mr. Olivier Zender, Deputy Permanent Representative, Permanent Mission of Switzerland to the United Nations, and Switzerland being our co-sponsor, he is most welcome. And then he will followed by Mr. Stephen Sekera, a Deputy Director of the United Nations Counterterrorism Implementation Task Force and the UN Counterterrorism Center. I will spare you the acronyms of these two animals. Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, you have the floor.
Well, Excellencies, dear guests, it's a great pleasure to be here at IPI for this gathering and to see so many of you present that managed to go through security. I just wanted to inform you that I will speak in French, so if you wish to understand what I'm saying, well, switch to channel 2, that's correct, isn't it?
Excellencies, it's a pleasure to share with you this situation to restore peace in the Dakar, in N'Djamena, the IPI and the governments in the second regional conversations in order to prevent high extremist violence. First of all, I want to raise some of the elements of this. First, the welcome reserved to Chad for this meeting was very profound, and it was a great pleasure for all of us who participated in these conversations, and also to join the region in the progression against extremist violence. And secondly, the conversations of N'Djamena also showed the importance of perseverance, and from the logic of security to prevention of violence, and that's carrying up long term. And the dimensions of violence are taken very seriously by the Secretary General and by also the some member states, and the ways that were defined in N'Djamena, and which we'll hear about later in this meeting, we have to be reminded about. It's in this daily engagement against violence and its causes that the differences will be defined. We therefore welcome all those who want to make the difference in practice, despite the difficulties. And thirdly, the conversations show that there is more and more voices that want to engage in preventing violence. And I cite the violence is results from the same things that the member states are engaged militarily, and therefore we have to construct the ways to allow us hand in hand to work together, but with all the forces of society. And finally, what comes out of these conversations, the main thing is we have to understand that we have to speak, and to speak we have to meet. The conversations were especially a space for dialogue and for exchange between actors, and this regional dimension was regional, and they brought together North and Central Africa, and the choice of the participants from different horizons, and the possibility of having the climate of discussion of the very delicate subject was very unique. And beyond the exchanges, the conversations also proposed a dialogue to address these problems, and this was this was an inspiration. The problems of extremist violence was posed by everyone who spoke, and the solutions they must be raised collectively in order to guarantee that they're really carried out. And this carrying out these will be good for everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, this should encourage the concretization of initiatives for alternatives against violence. And my country is trying to do this through its active participation in these conversations, and also in its joining with the other partners. The time has come in order to give the floor to the real actors who are carrying these out, and therefore in the debates which is going to follow. And I thank you for your attention. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for recalling the framework in which these conversations have taken place, and also thank you for reminding the approach that was adopted in order to deal with the problem of extremist violence. J'ai le plaisir maintenant de passer la parole à la personne, le prochain intervenant, Monsieur Stephen Sikiari. Vous avez la parole. Thank you, friends. It's a great pleasure to be here, and then I'm going to speak in English.
I'd like to thank the International Peace Institute and the Permanent Mission of Switzerland for taking up the critical issue of investing in peace and prevention in the Sahel. The continued surge of terrorism and violent extremism in the Sahel threatens to reverse much of the development progress made in recent decades in this critical region. By exploiting development challenges such as poverty, inequality, and poor governance, violent extremists further exacerbate grievances and create a vicious vortex which affects all marginalized groups. Particularly in conflict zones, such as in the Mali and its sub-region, this vicious vortex has shown to be a destructive force for the attainment of any development progress and has reversed many gains. This is why the Secretary General has made the prevention of violent extremism and counterterrorism one of his highest priorities for the United Nations. The prevention of violent extremism is indeed an essential component of the Secretary General's focus on conflict prevention and sustaining peace. Two recent empirical UN studies on foreign terrorist fighters, or FTFs, and violent extremism in Africa have confirmed that the drivers of violent extremism, which the UNPV plan published in 2015 seeks to address, are often synonymous with the root causes of conflict. Push factors of violent extremism, in particular the lack of socioeconomic opportunities, marginalization, discrimination, poor governance, violations of human rights, and the rule of law, have all been identified as drivers of conflict. In order to strengthen the institutional capacity and leadership on counterterrorism and violent extremism, the Secretary General has proposed the establishment of the Office of Counterterrorism under a new Undersecretary General, Vladimir Voronkov, and the two units that I was formerly the Deputy Director of have been put under this Office of Counterterrorism. The office has been mandated by the General Assembly to provide stronger leadership, enhance coordination and coherence across the system, mobilize political will and build robust partnerships, ensure a balanced implementation of the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy, and to ensure that PV is firmly rooted in the global strategy. I'd like to take the opportunity of this forum to commend the efforts of the G5 Sahel states and the representatives of those states here to achieve development and security through addressing them in a comprehensive manner. We hope the establishment of the G5 Sahel Regional Force will help to curb the activities of terrorist groups in the region. However, we also recognize that military measures alone will not defeat terrorism. It is not enough to fight terrorists on the battlefield or to deny them funds. The international community and our experience has shown that harsh crackdowns and heavy-handed approaches can be counterproductive and can lead to triggers to radicalization and violent extremism. We will only succeed in effectively addressing the increasingly transnational threat of terrorism if we develop a new and comprehensive agenda for multilateral cooperation with a focus on prevention. The international community must do more to address the roots of radicalization, including real and perceived injustices, high levels of unemployment, and grievances among young people. So I wanted to just also share with you that our office has put in place an integrated assistance for countering terrorism program in the G5 Sahel. There's 9 interactive, integrated projects that we're working with the countries with. And we look forward to also working with other partners, including IPI, on the important issue of prevention of violent extremism going forward. At the national level, we're also working with Mali, Burkina Faso, and with a number of partners in the region. So we do hope that our capacity building activities will provide civilian and criminal justice support to the G5 countries in their efforts to counter terrorism and prevent violent extremism. Let me conclude by saying that the Secretary General stressed in his opening address to the 72nd session that national and multilateral counterterrorism efforts have indeed disrupted networks, reclaimed territory, prevented attacks, and saved lives. But we need to intensify this work. Stronger international cooperation remains crucial against the fight against terrorism. For this reason, I'm very pleased to be opening today's side event on investing in peace and prevention in the Sahel and Sahara, and conclude with one more comment from the Secretary General, who said that it is possible to move from war to peace and from dictatorship to democracy. Let us push ahead with a surge in diplomacy today and a leap in conflict prevention for tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen, and I'm very happy you reminded us of the former Secretary General's action plan, where the emphasis is not just only on the hardware and the counter something, but also on the drivers, the governance and development deficits behind such phenomena. Thank you for coming and for your remarks. Let me now pass on to our panelists, and it's my pleasure to introduce to my extreme right, Ambassador Jean-Daniel Bieler, Special Advisor for Central Africa the Human Security Division of the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland. He next will take the floor, Honorable Aliou Gebi, to my right, Senior Special Advisor, Ministry of Interior of Nigeria. To my left, the person who will take the floor is Madeleine Memb, journalist, Media Women for Peace. She's from Cameroon. And to my extreme left, Honorable Gale Ngotigata, Member of Parliament of Chad. They were among the participants in the N'Djamena meeting I alluded to earlier, and we are grateful they made the time, and grateful for Switzerland and others to have supported their presence here. So without further ado, it's my pleasure now to give the floor to Ambassador Bieler.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Dear friends, over a year since the very first conversations in Dakar in January 2006, violent extremism is not diminishing, and especially in the regions so a big change has happened. So the security approach that was now is added to it, a reflection about the causes of this violence and their practice, and have difference and all the people who try to do this and why do they do it. And especially for us in Europe, they would come from North Africa, from West Africa and Central Africa. So we have to think. So there's a lot has been done since Dakar, about a year. So this second conversation we're gonna hear in different forms with the panelists next to me. For me, I see a lot of advances that are important in our understanding of what could be a preventative approach. So facing to violent extremism, the political approaches and social ones are the most positive, and they are founded on a very and deep knowledge the reasons why this violence and the places where it happens, as well as the history, the perception of history, and how these communities live it. So this is true in the north as well as in the south. This similarity that is very methodical will get us to a very common understanding. We have to honestly listen to them, and we have to keep this dialogue at all levels, whether it's on the family level, on the for me, they are the must-do before we get to a sustainable solution. So we started on this path. So there's a change in values is happening in all our populations in the north and the south. So the so-called democratic liberal system has not provided the political balance or stability that we thought was going to provide. So the innovations of all ideology that we live and technology we see every day, they leave behind populations, huge territories, and it is a very steep price that I have to pay. So all these inequalities that are produced, so a lot of people no longer feel that they are citizens of their country, and also not even from where they were from, where their country of their parents. So many of them are indignated by the politics of their own country towards them. Moreover, the communication between generations is now replaced by horizontal ties between people of the same generation, which deprives young people from the security of the family and the continuity that usually has nourished the development of the individual. We see a lot of these community, the friends, the meeting places now are at the heart of how people get recruited in violent extremism. And also, very often the people who are recruited are out of work or facing financial difficulties. Many people are looking for some social identity that not only gives them, a sense of meaning in their life, but also gives them some sense of dignity that gives them value. So if this search fails, so they look for extreme solutions, for example, to die as a hero in an act of violence. This need of identity, which is expressed in some military engagement of one sort or other, you have to take it seriously, because it's testing our own capacity for tolerance and reasoning. We, as social people who are in charge and politicians, we have to take this very seriously. We have seen in Gemini that there's no specific profile of the violent person, but there's a profile of the group who use violence to get to their goals, and they would use all the cracks and gaps in our social structure to get through. So these principles in this conversation, so we need to re-anchor our own political values where we are practicing them. They would go from very representative election to the access to political expression, or to worry about preservation of the environment. This is, we understand that altogether communities, NGOs, states will have to take our responsibilities and open the door to the dialogue, no matter where it is. So these conversations were very good. So there's an open message that could be sent to extremists without a social content. We have to leave some vernacular abstraction about ideology, a message that will call to the participation of these extremists to the fate of their community. These dialogues and conversations, we are far from being hopeless. We could change this destructive energy to a creative force. It already exists in an abundance. There are many examples that were described in Gemini. This energy has in itself a solution for the violent extremism. We have to convince ourselves of the urgency to actually get a hold of all the realities of all our regions, all of our countries are facing. And thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for these very frank and honest remarks, and also all of the advances that have been done and we get to an approach that is more nuanced and more asks for more participation from different actors. It's not a matter of just settling one conflict or other. And also thank you, that I find quite refreshing, to look at all the faults and failings of a liberal democracy. I think the most striking point is the necessity to is that extremists have to be part of the solution. I believe this will be quite a challenge, especially that they are banished. I hope this shift from a destructive approach to a creative one, that we, I think a sustainable peace should not exclude people who are violent. C'est mon plaisir maintenant de donner la parole à Monsieur Gabi, qui est ministre, conseiller au ministère de l'Intérieur au Nigeria. Monsieur, vous avez la parole. Merci.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for having me here, and thank you very much for giving me 10 minutes. It's a very short amount of time to get a lot out there. I agreed with some of the things said by the Deputy Director, Office of Counterterrorism at the United Nations. However, please forgive me, I have a very disjointed way of, I usually talk better when I'm sketching. We have a problem whose solution might be so simple it eludes all of us. And then we have a problem that is multi-layered, and when it suits us, we collapse all the layers into one. We also have a problem that some governments refuse to accept as the seeds of that particular problem. I'll start backwards. I'm from Nigeria. I'm from northeastern part of Nigeria. I am not exceptional in the story of northern part of Nigeria. I'm from a poor family, a very poor family, a family of about 25 children, and a polygamous family living a nucleated kind of life. So I'm an anomaly in the system that produced me. So for me to be here talking to you is actually almost a miracle, because such opportunities do not exist for people who come from where I come from. We have a triage of problems facing northeastern part of Nigeria, a place where poverty is endemic, almost biblical, but we've accepted it with some dignity. But now we have the emergence of weaponized poverty, layered with weaponized religion and then weaponized politics. The reason why I said government is aware of some of the problems is because government is the enabler of these problems deliberately, so that the children of the poor will produce cannon fodder for election cycles. So after election, the children are dumped and then everything goes back to normal until another 4-year circle, then the children of the poor become valuable assets in waging a political ideology. Now, extremism. It makes me a little bit uncomfortable, especially coming from where I come from again. I'm sorry, I'll keep making that point where I come from, because that is where my experience is limited to. Extremism seems to be targeted to just the religious face only. But no, we have political extremism, we have ethnic extremism, we have et cetera, and et cetera, and et cetera. But it is easy for government to take a brush and just paint everything and say it's religious extremism, or rather Islamic extremism, but we do have Christian extremism also, and say it's an Islamic problem, therefore this is the solution, this is the problem, which is why sometimes we never see the solution. What may start as an Islamic extremist movement could easily morph into a political extremism movement, or children of the poor trying to rise against poverty or lack of opportunity or social justice or equity, etc., and etc. So maybe the experts need to fundamentally begin to break these components down before we begin to apply solution. If you go to the doctor, if you don't allow the doctor to examine you properly, you give him restrictions, chances are the diagnosis will not be correct, and then the medicine will not give you any succor to whatever is ailing you. There is that. Secondly, there is the lack of political will. Lack of political will on the one side, and then the lack of sincerity of purpose. As long as it is the children of the poor killing themselves, we are okay. I give an example. It's just unfortunate we're not on the Chatham House rules. I mean, it could have been a little bit more exciting. So, but I will try. We have succeeded in degrading and dismantling the infrastructure of terror, Boko Haram in Nigeria. This is political speak. What does that mean? Does that mean because the attacks are no longer occurring in Abuja and the cities we have succeeded? Or is it that those that are on the fringes of society do not contribute or are not part of the wider society? This juxtaposes another problem. In my country, in my part of the country, there is a deliberate effort by children of the poor and their parents to migrate from being subjects to citizens. And this is a system, this is a migration, a movement that is resisted. But we can't have our cake and eat it. It is either we're all citizens of the Federal Republic or we're all subjects of some people ruling the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So this little issue has created so much problems and is still creating more problems, and it will continue to generate and create more problems. The lack of social justice, the lack of equitable distribution of opportunities. I give you another example from my ministry. The National Immigration Service will for example, put out an advert looking for to employ 1,000 people. They will end up getting about 10 million applications. On what basis are you going to employ the 1,000? On who is smartest? Who is from the right part of the country? Who is from the right family, right tribe, right religion, etc., etc. And this happens only maybe once in 5-6 years. So what happens to the remaining 9,900,000 and whatnot? When they see the practical example of children who are close to the seats of power getting the employments that should have been evenly distributed. What formula are we using? We have the quota system. Why should we even have a quota system in our constitution? The quota system deliberately ensures that only mediocrity rules. So if you are the worst from where you're coming from, but you are properly aligned at the right time, right place, you get the job. And we accept it. So we have to break these shackles that we deliberately put around our ankles, or that were deliberately put by less than 1,000 people to ensure they enslave us in perpetuity. Now back to the subject of Islamic extremism, since this is the topic we're discussing. What is Islamic extremism? I have always asked this question. I am a fundamentalist. I'm a Muslim. I wear the beard because I want to. I hike my trouser because I want to. I don't drink alcohol because I want to. And I believe in the fundamentals of Islam. But I also believe in the teachings of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, where everything must be in moderation, including enjoyment. I shouldn't drink too much Coke. I love Coke, by the way, but I shouldn't take too many because gluttony is not permitted in Islam. So what makes me, as defined by someone, an extremist? Is it because maybe the state, in its own extremist tendencies, killed my children, my parents, my wife, perhaps demolished my house, my madrasa, or the mosque I go to? And I try to seek for justice, and that justice is never given to me. In fact, more severe punishment is visited upon me. Does that make me an extremist? Or does that make me a very vengeful, angry young man, or old man, as the case might be? Then there's a notion that only children of the poor, it's always the poor, it's always the ignorant, and so on and so forth. The first-line commanders of Boko Haram went to the same school I went to. They studied the same courses we studied in school. They told their certificates. They made a choice to tear their certificates, to move to Markaz Ibn Taymiyyah, and to continue their own religion in that regards. So the notion that it's only children of the poor is absolutely wrong. Or the notion that it is the ignorant that join in Boko Haram is also absolutely wrong. There is something that is wrong. People are seeking to address it, to rectify it, but the system does not allow the vertical nor the horizontal approaches, traditionally, organically, to address those issues. And as long as they are not addressed, these issues will keep on happening and happening and happening. Then if you go back to the Sunnah, the Holy Prophet ﷺ warned us of the coming of the Khawarij. He told us it is there. Every Muslim knows this. And he also told us about the young men that will come and kill and kill and kill and kill. If you ask them why they are killing, they don't know why they are killing. He only described them as very angry young men. He described their appearance. Oh, I have only 2 minutes. This is a shame. So we Muslims know what the problem is. If we want to solve the religious component of the problem, we know how to solve it. Is peace possible? Yes, peace is possible. That's on the one hand. Then the structured organized society that labels whoever they decide to label, however, wheresoever, by whomsoever. That structured society also needs to adjust itself to the realities that are on the ground. Before I came in here, I was given a sheet of paper, what peace meant to me. Peace to me means I have 6 daughters and 1 boy. Peace to me means the ability to allow my children to go outside and play, to go to the mosque, to go to the park, to go to the market, to go to the movies, to come back home without me worrying where they are. Peace means to me for mothers to be allowed to be mothers, fathers to be fathers, and children to be children. And at any point in time, this balance is disturbed. There will be problems in society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Gaby, for this personal testimony and for in sharing with us your perspective of what drives this phenomena. And particularly, I appreciated how the problem is defined can help or hinder the search for solution. And it was good that you added other drivers of this phenomenon in addition to the list that Stephen shared with us: social justice and lack of job opportunity. Last but not least, let's find some room to listen to those who cause harm. They may have elements of a solution. It's now my pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Madeleine Memb, a journalist, a media woman for peace, Cameroon. Madeleine, you have the floor.
I'm going to continue giving personal testimony. The studies have showed that Boko Haram, many of those people are the highest, the worst, are victims in action, but also in the other areas, which when there's no solution. For example, the kidnappings that we've seen were carried out with us. We had got a lot of media coverage, but there have been others that didn't get so much media coverage, and also forced marriages for when women just get a little bit to eat in the evening, and there are lots of forms of violence and in this conflict, and that are not just linked but related by the media or by the political people. In the role of women in this question, I want to recall that despite all the suffering that the women have seen, that their children kidnapped, many of their family members disappearing. And they often say to me, they want to know where did they go? Are they in prison? We don't know where they went. It's not possible. You could write a document on these questions of these widows, and I hope we're going to be able to do it. But fortunately, what I see is that they're not giving up, and they're active. They've taken on the struggle, and they travel on motorcycle. Because there's just a danger of mines, and their husbands have staying, and therefore then there's these localities. These are regularly a place where there's Boko Haram interventions, bombardments, and the people are dying, but there's also the people decide to stay there. And so these women left their local area. They sold everything, and instead of going to the refugee centers, they chose to go to seek a space. One with 5 children to a place where they could place their children in a home, and with a budget of less than $1 to get water, juice for their children, and so to get food for the children and send them to the school and keep them safe from violence that you see in the refugee centers, and these women stood high. And we asked a woman who saw her child killed, beheaded in front of her, and then we said, what can we do? And what I'm pleading for is that women need to be accompanied, need to be supported. And God knows that it's the most complex problems, because they are taking on everything: education, health. They're responsible for food, daily food. And then they're in a situation in extreme poverty. They completely they've lost everything, and they're not home, and so they can't do anything. They can't work, and therefore, can women play a role in this investment policy? I say yes. At a very high level, and we must understand why feminism exists. Is that the women are participating actively in the building peace, but also in the decision-making levels, because they want to orient policy toward to take into account what they're seeing and what they're living, and I want to speak about the politicians, but when women go into politics, it's very effective. And so these women in Cameroon, next to Nigeria, it's the same situation. The women are in a situation of terrible distress. It's time now that we give them the means to, contrary to what you might think, it's not essentially a question of material means. It's they've had a traumatism, and we must bring them solutions, psychological solutions, the answers. They give them the words that the suffering. We must give them the words to express and reflect on this suffering, and to try to understand what's happening to them. And so they're simply understanding why your child is being radicalized, because there's no work, because there's no other things. And the children are being radicalized by the fact that the situation no longer adequate, and therefore we're in a region where culture is everybody is confronting this with culture, and there's this communal radio that's carrying out communal consciousness level, taking consciousness, and so you have the father. You can have the husband who just divorces just by saying I divorce you 3 times, and this, for example, this woman just had her 2nd child, and she didn't even have the time to have a real marriage. She already had a divorce with a child of 12. And we're divorcing children of 12, 13 years old, and he has to leave her children because you can't leave with the children, and the lack of affection that the child is going to have to live with. It's going to be, how's it going to be dealt with? How's it going to be addressed? And who is going to give him the means to defend himself? My struggle is so that the women will have the means, the affection, the feelings, the social means to raise and educate their children. In these regions, Boko Haram is taking advantage of the fact that women have no rights. And if you don't give the means to the women to educate their children, we're going to go from a worse and worse situation, because the children will escape their control. They will not have a relevant speech that they can conform to the speech, and on the radio they make them understand that something else is possible, we must explain to the mothers that when you have a child who's radicalizing, how do you raise them in humanism and tolerance? How do you explain these things, and break the hold that religion has, and Islam is not unique. All religions have the force of God, and I think that I'm convinced that if we want peace to be restored long term, we must give the power to women, empower women, and very few children who lack their mothers. We have to give the women the understanding of their power, and I have to conclude there. I think that each of these case studies could take an hour, and it's very moving personal stories, and I thank you very much. And I think there's a message that we don't hear enough, and it's being camouflaged, it's being hidden, is how to use women, to use them to express themselves, and helping them, especially women who've been traumatized, as you said. They must learn, so that to give them the right to speak, to give them a voice, and allow them to express what they feel, and that they can have a participating role. If you want to have peace, you must begin with women, especially mothers. Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Mr. Gata. Thank you very much. The distinguished guests, I call on you. I'm going to call you friends, because we're hearing something very important. Somebody is being available to listen. We're here from each country. In each country we have the problems. And your availability is to share your problems that we are living. I think that we have done collectively a lot of progress, but we must go forward. I'm a living actor of the question of dialogue and the whole question of violent extremism in Chad. I began very early to feel the number of children who were sent into the centers for Quranic study, and when I said to the government, saying that when you go there, and 2,000 women by a year, when you multiply at 12,000 the children who are not going, and you don't, they wouldn't listen to me. The government wouldn't listen to me, and the situation has completely changed. Both changed a lot. The conversations in Jamena, the conversation took place in Jamena. I left Jamena at a time when there were caravans around Jamena for radicalizing people, and you can't imagine that 2 or 3 years ago, because the government made the struggle against Boko Haram a taboo question. You weren't allowed to talk about it. The laws were so hard that when you condemned someone, Boko Haram, because they'd done something, they were condemned to 14 years, but they were shot. There was no appeal. You couldn't bring the sentence to a proportionate level, and so there are lots of signs of progress that are being accumulated, and truly everyone is trying to invest himself in this work to do better. The first sign of progress that I've observed, is especially in Chad, is the actors associating themselves together, but in order to help communities to reorient themselves work in agriculture. Who's going to do agriculture? Who's going to do other work? In other words, the international community is intervening in the NGOs, in the European Union, in the UN, the states, the Lake Chad region is being rebuilt. Even though a few kilometers farther, Boko Haram is sowing death and destruction, and the actors are working together. So we're finding the different states and the political actors and civil society, NGOs, with an important component of the religious and organizations and women, and investing themselves in this work is taking form. And in each state, the subject at the time was a taboo question, and the state had a monopoly on the subject, on the debate. It was an open debate. And now we're discussing what's going on, why children are disappearing, why are they mobilizing young children in violence. There's been a freedom of speech. The voices have been freed up, and now so we have a conversation. And the NGOs and the state are contributing to this, and so the government is no longer the only actor and doesn't simply have a monopoly on dealing with the conflict on violence, extremism, extremist violence. And I observed that a week or two ago in Najama, there was a debate, a university debate on violent extremism. And in 2 years ago, you couldn't do this in Najama, because the government would call you an apologist for violence, and you could be condemned to death, and sentenced to death. And so there's really been a change in the acts, and this effort must be continued. If you observe all these efforts combined, they're based on an approach toward violent extremism that's a global approach, and not simply a security approach. There's the question of education, which is in the center of our concerns. There's also the question of health, which the extremist organizations are exploiting by creating charity organizations, giving a hold over the population and exerting control, and also rural development, which was deficient, and because the capital, the aid was not sufficient, and now the NGOs, all the organizations are helping the local population to insert themselves into the population, to be productive, and to have activities for fishing and other activities. And all of this is occupying the population, giving them jobs, and so there's a conjunction of interests. There's the trafficking and the mafias and the manipulation and economic interests that are trying to exploit the children. But against this, the population is standing up against this. And this must be encouraged, and the social expectations are starting again the new process of development. These things that I've just spoken, the health, education, development, security, are no longer simply the monopoly of the state, but people themselves are taking them out. This is one of the things which is very important, and it must continue in these areas. And it's starting to expand, and now the negative points is the resistance by the government to put themselves in question in governing all the questions of democracy, liberty, freedoms the states must think about these questions, because this is also part of the global approach. You can't look at all these other problems if you forget this fundamental aspect. And also, the governments are reticent to have a dialogue with those who are for the extremist violence. I think this is false. We have to find the opening for dialogue, and engage these actors in an overall dialogue that allows us to build a new society where we can all live together. It would be good for everybody.
Thank you, Your Honorable Minister, for this contribution that is very relevant and edifying. You have focused on that this phenomenon is not the monopoly of the state, and there have been progress, and that a global approach or holistic approach needs to exist that includes education, health, and rural development. And this we need to ask for the contribution of the communities to get a solution. You ended by you encourage the states to question themselves and question their governance so far, how to manage, and also you mentioned dialogue, as others have, with people who actually carry on these acts of violence.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a good 25 minutes or so for give and take, questions and answers. And if you could raise your hands, and the microphone will come to you. I recognize first the gentleman in the middle, and then the gentleman to the left.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud. My name is Alan Gary. I am a senior researcher with the Institute for Security Studies in Pretoria and with a presence in the rest of the continent. I just want to thank the IPI, the government of Switzerland, the organizers of this very, very interesting event. I have attended a number of events the whole week, but this for me is the best that I have been to. And I think the reason for that is because you have injected in this panel, in this discussion, countries, stories, situations that really speak to violent extremism. And we are looking at lived experiences of victims and communities, an issue that is very close to my heart, and involving these people in trying to get solutions to these issues. So I'd like to thank all the speakers for invoking these very important stories. They shouldn't just stay with us here in this room, but they should resonate with us wherever we go and work. I just want to ask a question to Madam Memb, and you gave a very touching story about a girl who is perhaps divorced and has these children. She herself is a child and has got to raise these children. Is there any evidence, is there any experience that you can share with us of these girls then joining violent extremist groups or being driven closer to organizations that would perhaps increase their attitudes or develop their attitudes towards violent extremism? Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman in the corner.
My name is Ram Chaluri. I'm with the Peace Coalition in Princeton. I have kind of a general question. How does United Nations decide whether or not leave it to the superpowers to fight it out, like in Syria, versus something like what's happening in Chad in terms of UN peacekeeping? UN peacekeeping, this is the first time that I heard that it could be offensive also. So I'm not really sure how I understand the difference between offensive versus defensive peacekeeping versus leaving it alone to the superpowers to fight it out.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure this panel is properly situated to address your question, but we'll keep it in mind maybe for another panel. I'd be happy to take one or more two questions. If not, I will then turn it back to our speakers. So you have one question that was addressed by the gentleman. Thank you for your comments. And I'm sure our IPI colleagues and the co-organizers have taken note of your appreciation. And without further ado, I'll give the floor to Madame Bembe.
Thank you, Mr. Gary, who comes from South Africa. Well, we cannot have this direct, linkage for women, young women under distress. The region is really suffering from this, marriages that are very unstable. We try to stop this practice, but it's really anchored. But this link between radicalization and the suffering of these women, it's not something very but yet it does contribute. All these frustrations, first there's the systemic weakness, there's no work and there's no opportunity, but now there are weaknesses that are within, emotional frustrations. I have a young friend who does search. So there are young people that will join Boko Haram because they would be married the next day, so they will have a wife. Young men are attracted not only by violence but also by having, because these women they are being rejected by society. But one study has confirmed, are they these frustrated women that ended up at Boko Haram? This is, I'm not certain of, and I cannot say. But the ones who went to Boko Haram, they have been emotionally frustrated, or within their place in society, a young man who is not yet married, and you know that dowry is expensive, like 15 heads of livestock, that's like a whole herd. If we cannot, they will get little money to start some sort of business, and a woman, since the first night he would have a woman at his disposal. I don't know if I answer your question.
Merci. Do you want to add? Did I see your finger? No. I have two more participants who would like to take the ambassador, and then Dr. Danieli.
Thank you, Yusuf. I am the French ambassador and special envoy for the Sahel. I really appreciated this presentation. There is something that I found kind of exciting, that the Ambassador Beller, and that to dialogue with the most extremist group, the ones that are most violent. This, of course, this call for dialogue is very positive. It's something should be considered. This is something we lived in 2000 with what happened in Sierra Leone. There's also what happened with justice and reconciliation, and what are the conditions of this year. So beyond this call for dialogue, have you thought about the framework? How this dialogue should go over? For example, the case of Boko, they have committed, very atrocious crimes against humanity. How to balance between dialogue, justice, reconciliation, and also how to include the perspective of the victims. If you just call the dialogue, I'm afraid that by the next day over, they will say people are crazy. Thank you.
Je vous remercie. microphone.
Hi, I'm Dr. Danieli, International Organization for Victims Assistance. And I have created 2 books on terrorism from the victim's point of view, some of it for the UN. I actually, rather than keeping in the usual dimensions that were analyzed, I caught both the ambassador and you, Madame, speaking about relationship between the generations, parents and children, as a factor. Would you please elaborate on that? I consider that very important because it's not just societal, but intrafamilial. So I think it's a dimension that's usually not elaborated upon. Thank you. I have about 2,000 other questions, but...
That's good. I think that's good. Okay, I'm happy to take one last question before I turn it back to our... yes, the microphone there.
Laura of UNDP. I want to take this opportunity. There's somebody from Cameroon and Chad to ask with the trans-border aspect. I believe that this region, I would like to hear from you, Mr. Gata and Madame Mam. What about the cooperation trans-border for the prevention of violent extremism? Has this worked? Is this something that's being done or something being elaborated as we speak? And thank you. I will give the floor to Mr. Gata. Son honorable Monsieur Gabi, to answer the question about the dialogue and who shall lead this dialogue and what framework, especially with all the what he mentioned, and then to you, and to give some answers to Dr. Daniel and answers to the last person, and then at the end I would ask Ambassador Bia to make comments about all what's been done. I would like to start with the Honorable Gabi.
Thank you very much. And that's an excellent question. The last regime, I'll use a Nigerian example, did not understand the concept of dialogue with Boko Haram. For the record, Boko Haram has never not wanted to dialogue with government, right from its inception. The problem was government did not understand the notion or concept of dialogue within the understanding of the Boko Haram paradigm. They wanted sulh. So at any point in time, dialogue was mentioned. Even the lowest, most ignorant foot soldier of Boko Haram would say dialogue is something that is evil, it is something that is Western, and is a contraption of government to entrap them. Because several attempts at dialogue through back channels had occurred, and unfortunately, those who came out were either killed or captured by government. So Boko Haram has always agreed there will be sulh with the government based on the teachings of the Quran. And what is sulh? Sulh simply means truth and reconciliation, meaning you must admit you have wronged me, just as I would admit I have wronged you. That is the premise upon which we will build whatever agreement we will build. Then several times again, government had this habit of shifting the goalpost. We will go out into the field, for example, government would say, okay, we're willing to cede A, B, and C. Government will also send another team outside saying we will cede Y, X, D, B, and so on and so forth. So when you go to the insurgents, your legitimacy is questioned. And even when your legitimacy is not questioned, the goalpost is constantly shifted by government. You go and you bring back A, B, and C. Government says, no, but we want E, F, G, H, and go back and talk to them again. And they always say, well, government is not serious. But Sulh is possible, and sulh is being offered as we speak, inshallah.
So even the word dialogue, we need to revisit what it means. And I think many of us who have engaged into this, it does not mean that the track one are the ones who initiate it, because there are all kind of restrictions.
And this is where I ask, given the floor to the Honorable Mr. Gatta, I would like you to answer, but also the dialogue with the victims. Who is in charge? So your question, you are not the first person who asks this. I go around this, and this question is always being asked to me. First, I would like to answer you with one personal discovery. I arrived to Mauritania. There was a discussion for scholars about the dialogue in the Sahel, and we asked the question, and a man approaches and said, "You come from Chad?" I said, "Yes." Do you know the person with whom you traveled? No. That person is your fellow citizen. Well, I guess. Do you know that he was Imam of Al-Turabi in Sudan? Do you know that myself and the other colleague, we were legal advisors of bin Laden? I said no. And I said, what? Why are you asking this question? He told me that all organizations that are working in the Sahel, they work in a network. They have legal advisors in all the big mosques and the big metropolises. You cannot discuss with if you don't find like a way to answer. If you were to ask the question of the person you came with in Gemini, you would find an answer with regards to Boko Haram. This all means what? It means that mosques and the directs of Quranic mosque or zawiyas, these camps for they have multiple actors that are also participate or of the violence. There has to be a political will that there would be a dialogue because with us who we don't carry weapons because they have a relationship with the people who are violent. There has been 4 or 5 years I've been shouting that our problem with Cheko, that after the experience with the Cameroonian MP that lived most dramatic adventures, we have to look further for these contacts with Cheko. The people have tried. Somebody said earlier, we were able to liberate some of the girls of Cheko. How did that happen? This is a discussion. This is one contact. We don't have. I beg for the government and all these advisors who work on the violent extreme that we are not searching enough or deep enough for the real actors. So once we put aside this fear of speaking with a monster, we have to look with whom, through whom we should get to. There needs a will, there needs to be a serious search. Then when we get, when I get myself in these networks of these Salafis, this gets me to Sudan. We live with people in these capitals that we ignore. There was an article from a research center in Paris that was published like 4 or 5 days ago. he explained the relationship between the youth that were recruited in small businesses of like welders or fruit vendors by Boko Haram. This is our ignorance of their own network and how they work, and that's how we don't know how to do. With regards to victims, I have been in Niamey work of NGOs that are work in the region of the Lake Chad region. So the villages, they don't want to welcome their youth who went to Boko Haram. Even though the ones who went to Boko Haram, they want to come back to their village. Amongst them are young women who were abused. They were pushed back because they became the subject of shame in the, the village culture in Africa. So there's a lot of work, these paths, these ways to to welcome back these young ladies, young women to society. I believe the work of these NGOs is quite remarkable. We have to break all this sense of tradition we have. We have to, that our population, we have to accept that were attracted by Boko Haram, they were also victims. This is also a matter of method, approach, and knowledge of the realities on the ground. Thank you, Mrs. Ma'am. I believe that I will pass the ball, His Honorable, with regards to the question, with regards to the corporate transport. Yes. If I remember, Dr. Danieli wanted to know the kind of relationship, children and with their parents. We spoke about this when we spoke about how to involve media and the prevention of conflict. So from the beginning, there was no firm position taken or optimistic with regards to their role. There were a lot of people, they were still defending. They would say it's not their mission to raise awareness, but we said if the media, they don't do it, who will do? And now the media, they would just sell ideologies and whatnot. So if they cannot sell it, who can? If the peace is the most precious commodity, the most common thing, and the most dear thing. So the content of what the media could offer to the audience, they have to go into the weaknesses within individual, but also the systemic weaknesses, especially there are a lack or there is not enough of this personal development of these individuals. A lot of people are waiting for somebody to have this positive influence, but it's also the work of that person in question to do the work as well. So there's a generational conflict, if there's a conflict of this or that, but we do regret the education that we give our young people is just to call for help, but they don't ask the question, what is it that I have not done myself to make myself happier? Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Before passing the floor to the ambassador, this was also an experience on the site, on the ground. This question of overlap of borders is the question of cooperation between military forces. Everybody is excluded. 3 or 4 years ago, we began to shake up the governments and the army. I'm very happy to see, since the German conversation in Cameroon, we were speaking about how the military should dialogue with the population. There was a colonel, that's right. 2 or 3 years ago, I published a study of the population that was a cross-border population from the Cameroon and Niger and Chad, and the ethnic groups, which cooperate in trafficking, in commercializing prohibited products. And they said, what you're saying is not true, they told me. And the deputy went to Lake Chad, and he said, he observed it. And I said, you need to include the local population, because they know when you speaking about Cameroon in the southeast of the Peru state, right in Chad, Lake Chad, and also Cameroon. When you look at the Peru, the Loesa, the Budama, it's also the same. Why not use these populations to try to resolve the different questions that they're all living together, they're sharing? And the NGOs intervened, and but the NGOs don't listen to the governments, and they go and do the work. And why? How can these populations cooperate? And if we work with them, we'd solve a lot of the problems. And a question of identification of the action networks and the people who are included in this, and if we include them, we can really accomplish certain things. Thank you very much. The question that was raised by the ambassador, and also we all know that the efforts of the trying to dialogue with the extremist organizations is very complicated. It's complicated, obviously, multi-sectoral. There's not just one way, not just one area in which it's necessary to try to reach out, and we know that we have several experiences from Switzerland in these regions, and near the regions that we're talking about today, of dialogue that we've supported, the dialogue we supported. In particular, when the large, wide discussion took place concerning Joseph Kony in the South Sudan, that lasted for 2 years, and all the aspects that have been mentioned were raised, and the transitional justice, victims, the future, the system, the governing, all this was done, and we supported the efforts of the South Sudanese government and the Uganda government to try to find a solution that could allow to putting an end to the activities of Joseph Kony. And for 2 years, the approach of negotiation, Joseph Kony didn't kidnap a single child, and finally that failed for reasons that it's not we're not going to go into here, but it was possible. Another effort that we did, Switzerland did, was in Sahel, in Somalia. We supported very regularly and systematically, which allowed the efforts of in the Accords. It led to the approach of peace in Mali. Another dynamic that Switzerland has followed was in the liberation of the girls in Chibok, and from the humanitarian point of view, and all of this was based upon in terms of the Western countries like us, on a desire to a political will to accomplish something. You need political will, and it's so obvious that it always, not only the political will, but also the people who will assume, who want to do it. It's not obvious within our country, and it's not obvious in the countries which are concerned. And as for us, those who participate in these activities, we are continuing. We are working in our country to plead for peace and also dialogue, and to support those who are pleading for peace on site, including the 3 panelists who are here. There are many more, and that was the object of the discussion, of the conversations, and to bring together all these friends in the governments, in the NGOs, and also in the individuals, and who have this vision that peace is possible and it's necessary.
Thank you. We come to an end, like all good things do come to an end. Let me just leave 3 thoughts with you. The first is addressing this phenomena of violence, and particularly violent extremism, depending on your starting point. Is your starting point peace or the eradication of the problem? And throughout the design of these various regional meetings, it's the former rather than only the latter. Number 2 is that there is so much knowledge produced in the region, but there's not enough humility to listen and learn from those who observe the problem, who live with the problems, and who are closest to the problems, therefore are integral part of the solution. 3, we have discovered that there is not enough input by women and young people to the designation of the problem and the development of solutions. And as my speaker to the right, it is how you define the problem that usually dictates the solution. And sometimes you come with a solution in order to define the problem. And so I'd like you please to join me in thanking our guests for enlightening us and enriching our thinking on this issue.